Okay, so we are about to start our first deep dive, which is actually called Advancing Equality in the Global South. Before we start I thought I will introduce you to activity number 2. So basically the next envelope in your wonder bag. And then I have an addition to make. Everything that is not in an envelope in your wonder bag, you can play with it and you can eat it at any point in time. So if you have pipe cleaners, you're allowed to make hearts and shapes and robots. And with the little things, I forgot what they are called, you can use them as decoration. Okay, so for the deep dive, the activity looks as follows. It's a yellow envelope. And if you open the yellow envelope, it will look like this. And the goal is that during the deep dive, you help us come up with questions for the breakout groups that are tomorrow. So tomorrow there are 2 breakout sessions with each 5 groups. I hope you all signed up for 1 each, because that will help us determine which groups we will put in which room. But as you can see on this thing that I'm holding here in front of me, there are going to be 10 breakout sessions total. The topics are here at the top. Yeah, you can also read more in the program, but basically here are the 10 breakout sessions. And you can ask or basically write down questions that you think might spark a conversation in those breakouts, particularly those, if you are torn between 1 and 2 breakouts and not sure which one to go, at least put your question there. So then overnight, we're going to reassemble all these Post-its and give to each moderator of a breakout session all the questions you wrote down. So far, so good. If I didn't explain it clearly, you still have the information and overview in front of you. Okay, so with this, I'm delighted to introduce yet another very dear friend and colleague. One sec. Okay, better. So Chinmayi, Arun, please welcome me on stage. Chinmayi runs the Center for Communication Governance at National Law University in Delhi, and she is also on the executive committee of the network of centers. Welcome, Chinmayi. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I would like to welcome on stage the 4 fire starters for this deep dive session. That would be Rehema Baguma from Makerere University, another dear friend and inaugural member of the Global Network of Centers. You heard him a little earlier today. That's K.S. Park, who's a professor at Korea University Law School. I'd also like to invite Jennie Bernstein from UNICEF to join us, and Kathleen, who has been kind enough to take Nnenna's place at short notice, but she's truly exceptional and I'm looking forward to hearing from her, as I'm sure are you. So sorry, just to introduce you a little bit to the deep dive sessions, all that we are going to do over here is we're going to offer provocations. And then the idea is really that we make it conversational. You're invited not just to ask questions or to engage on comments that engage with what you heard here. This is a little different from the sessions that we've had in the morning. Please feel free to make statements, to offer your perspectives, because the deep dive is really, it's about all of you talking as well. So we're going to begin with Kathleen, who is a data scientist from Africa's Talking. And then we're going to move on through the session. But if anyone has anything pressing to say, I'm looking around, this is conversational and it's your space, so we can always stop, have a conversation, and then move on to the next fire starter. Kathleen, if I can invite you to start.
Okay, thank you. So as she has mentioned, my name is Kathleen, and besides being a data scientist at Africa's Talking, I co-organize a community for women in machine learning and data science, so the Nairobi chapter of women in machine learning and data science. And so I'm passionate about helping about the democratization of machine learning and just helping individuals who would like to grow their personal skill in the field by informing their learning journeys, connecting them with peers who they can collaborate with, and finally connecting them with opportunities. And something that has come up out of my experience with running this community is the fact that despite being a community for women, we still have our attendance being more men than women. So if you're a guy and you want to attend, we won't lock you out. But so I got curious because it is women in machine learning and data science, but then repeatedly we would have men coming over and over again, but then women would come once and then sort of not come again. So I got curious about where the women are. And so that conversation is what is going to inform my contribution today, just the search for where women are in the bigger conversation of inclusion. So with my experience, with finding out where the women are, I think it starts with, first of all, social and cultural beliefs. I can speak for Kenya in particular, where I remember in primary school repeatedly being told, so I went to a girls' primary school, just only girls, and I remember we were repeatedly told that because we are girls, we are stronger in languages, so we should put a focus on that, and then that would make up for our grades in our sciences. And then fast forward to high school, where there's a national examination at the end of the 4 years of high school, and some subjects are optional while others are compulsory. So this arises in a situation where schools can also choose what subjects to offer their students. So you find that because girls are said to perform better in certain subjects versus others, for the school's grade to be kept, for the school's average to be kept high, they'll offer some subjects and as opposed to others. For example, physics. And so you have girls going through high schools that don't offer physics, and then at the end of the day, when it comes to choosing their courses at the university level, they cannot enroll into any engineering courses because physics is a prerequisite to this. And then fast forward to now being at uni, I studied mathematics and computer science for my undergraduate, and out of a class of 55, we were 4 girls. And this is the point at which people start to ask themselves, where are the women? Why are we not enrolling more in engineering courses? And we left us back in primary school when we were telling us that we perform better in languages, so concentrate on that. But now, besides that, zooming out to the greater global south, from working with the community, I find that it's not a lack of even people having innovative and creative ideas, because I see a lot of AI innovations which are pet projects at the end of the day, because we have individuals who have day jobs and this data science is just something that they do on the side. So it brings me to question, it occasionally brings me to question the fact that if some of these individuals were in a different context, would they have already gotten funding? Would their ideas now be a startup? Would they be now building teams and then fleshing it out? And just to add to that, I was having a conversation earlier today with someone, and we were talking about the accuracy of Google Translate with local languages in Africa. For example, Kiswahili, which is one of the national languages in Nairobi. And we were saying how, so some European languages, for example, will have more speakers, which have less speakers than some of the local languages in Africa, have better performance with machine translation on Google Translate. And at the end of the day, I know of one particular individual who has tried to do work in NLP with Swahili, but at the end of the day, it's on the side, it's a pet project. He hasn't really gone far with it. So I guess my contribution to this is that, first of all, inclusion needs to start much, much earlier. And then when it comes to it, to the individuals who funnel down and then do become practitioners in machine learning and data science, funding would play a big role in just encouraging some of these innovations to grow further. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I was telling her when I heard the version of this a little earlier on that that if funding, etc., had existed earlier, I would probably have wanted to be Kathleen when I grew up. It's I now want to invite, so that was a really interesting perspective because it takes it into account time, the stage at which inclusion needs to start happening, but also an intersectional perspective, right? Because although this is a panel on the Global South, there's, even within the Global South, there are communities of people that end up being left behind much faster. I want to move on from Kathleen's narrative to KS, who's worked on technology from points of view that intersect in interesting ways, because he's not only a professor of law, he also runs OpenNet Korea and has been very actively engaged in technology litigation. So if I can invite you to chime in.
Thank you. I have two good news who are concerned about exclusive effect or exclusive risks of AI. Number one is that it is us, it is human beings that will control the output of AI. That's the first news. The second news is that we have built-in legal systems that rein in the dominant or monopoly-seeking aspect of AI. I'm going to explain each at a time. The first one, what people often forget is that AI is still a program designed to assist what people want to do by automation. Now, let's think about Microsoft chatbot Tay. Many people will think that it shows the discriminatory or exclusive risks of AI, and many will think that it gives an advanced view of what AI may do when it is deployed for insurance underwriting or recruitment or other platforms or other situations where human beings are evaluated. But if you think about chatbot Tay, the problem there was that the instruction given to Tay was too low level. I never talked to the programmer, but probably the instruction given to chatbot Tay is probably to become the most popular Twitterer. Now, to become the most popular Twitterer, probably it just took the shortcut by imitating the sensational online behavior of racist or sexist Twitterers. Now, we can address this problem by giving a higher order instruction to chatbot Tay. For instance, become the most popular Twitterer that does not discriminate against vulnerable groups and define vulnerable groups. Or we can give much higher order instruction, like become just, all right? Or give some multifaceted instructions that weave together other modus operandi than the number of followers or the number of retweets. What I mean is that if there are moral or ethical constraints that you want to build into AI's behavior, you can just simply hard code those constraints into AI. And we are not new to this. I mean, Asimov's 3 laws is one such attempt. It comes from the author's hard thinking about what minimum moral norms that robots must follow. And the laws are simple because he's not a philosopher. He just wanted to write a novel. We can build a more intricate set of norms that can be hard-coded into AI. And the problem is that we don't know. We human beings are ourselves don't know what ethical norms that we all agree. So in the end, AI is not going to replace human thinking, but it will enforce human thinking, as long as human instructions are clear and non-conflicting. Look at moral machines, the experiment that MIT is running. In trying to decide what the self-driving car is going to do when it sees pedestrians crossing the street, they are not asking the machine to make the decision. They are crowdsourcing human decisions to decide on what the best driving behavior of a self-driving car is. Was it last year that Mercedes was found as having decided that they'll prioritize the safety of the driver over pedestrians whenever stopping a car to avoid the pedestrian threatens the safety of the driver? That decision was not made by a machine. It was made by the officers of a Mercedes. So, even if we use AI for insurance underwriting or loan underwriting or police deployment or recruitment, yes, it will have risks of deepening the discrimination inherited from the past, but we can change that by hard coding. We can change the result, and we have faced those situations even before AI was developed to a level that is now. Strictly merit-based admissions or strictly merit-based government contracting have resulted in exclusive effects on African American students or contractors in the US. So the US adopted affirmative action because they didn't like the result, to make the society more equal. And we can just build those into AI. So I don't think it is AI that is the problem. I think it is the humans that have not agreed upon what the fair result is, what the fair result we expect from algorithmic decision making. The second good news is that we already have a legal system that can abate the development of or wayward development of AI, and that is data protection law. Now, data protection law applies to the stage where data is collected, and deep learning or machine learning is made possible only by big data. Is this true? I don't know. I'm assuming that it is true. It is made possible only by big data. And what is big data? Big data, 3 V's, right? Velocity, volume, variety. So the third V, variety, means that to do sufficient big data, you have to collate, you have to merge different databases. And usually these databases were built for different purposes. And under GDPR, using a previously built database for a different purpose that data subjects never agreed to is a violation of data protection law. And merging 2 databases built for 2 different purposes is already a violation of data protection law. And especially when GDPR defines pseudonymized data as personal data, there is a humongous legal impediment to doing any big data under GDPR. And I don't think this is just a coincidence that data protection regulation sets up impediment to big data and therefore impediment to AI that feeds on the big data, because if you watch the movie Deus Ex Machina, the protagonist, the guru, programming guru, later reveals how he built AI. Does anyone remember how he built AI? Where he got the data from? From the internet, right? It is through collective intelligence. It is through data produced by, made available by the people in general. It is based on that data that AI was made possible. And that means that people will continue to claim some sort of public interest obligations on the data controllers. The greater the data processing activity, the greater social good that they'll demand. So those are the two, I think, going forward, the constraints that we will work with in developing AI, and that will abate much of the concerns about exclusive effects of AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to pause over here because you've said a bunch of provocative things that at least I would have the urge to argue with if I was not being a good moderator. Does anyone want to chime in at this stage? I think that you've been offered quite a lot of food for thought. Just checking. No? Okay, so then we'll continue with the next two fire starters and then come back to you if that's okay. Okay, so Rehema, you had a lot of very interesting things to say about AI's potential for inclusion, specifically because I know that you're coordinator of the Development Informatics Research Group at the university. And so if you want to either respond to what you've heard or add to what both the previous speakers have said.
Thank you so much, Chinmayi. Respondents of the two keynotes talked a lot about a number of challenges of AI and inclusion, especially around the 4 dimensions of AI and inclusion talked about by ANSAF. They also talked about possible solutions. So I'm going to share my thoughts about possible solutions for the challenges of AI and inclusion, particularly in the context of, in my context as an academic in a developing country. I come from Makerere University, which is found in Uganda. The first possible solution for the challenges of AI and inclusion is ensuring diversity in the development teams of AI applications. This is necessary in order to address the diverse differences in culture, in religion, in gender, in ethnicity, etc. I came across a case on the internet which talked about a case in South Korea where a vacuum robot ate hair of a woman who was sleeping on the ground. And apparently, sleeping on the ground is a common practice in South Korea. But the development of the vacuum robot didn't take into consideration the differences, the perspectives of differences in culture. The second possible solution to the challenges of AI and inclusion is developing industry standards, industry-wide standards to evaluate AI applications around the four dimensions of AI and inclusion mentioned by ANSAF. And these are develop, decipher, de-identify, and de-bias. Then the third possible solution to the challenges of AI and inclusion is integrating participatory design, which some people call co-design, in the training of AI experts. This integration of participatory design will expose the AI experts to the benefits of involving stakeholders in the development process of AI applications, as well as enabling them learn how they can effectively involve the different stakeholders in the development of AI applications. Then the last possible solution is to set up as well as support more research and development initiatives that are based in the South in order to increase the amount of research coming out of developing countries, as well as applications developed from the South and by the Southerners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rehema. That was very well within time. Jennie, I know that you've been, so Rehema has offered a lot of suggestions about ways in which we can move forward, and I know that you have also been thinking about concrete ways in which we can deal with this, with the inclusion problem, if I may call it that. So if you just want to introduce that to us.
Certainly. So thank you so much. I think we've heard a lot about how important it is to do no harm and the different principles and considerations to that end. Something I wanted to continue on as far as the good news is beyond just doing no harm, how can we leverage the transformative power of AI tools to do good, both at an individual level by getting more people involved and democratizing it in that way, but also in bringing really the scaling ability of this technology to affect positive change about at the country level or even the international level. So to that note, some ways that UNICEF has always thought about leveraging technology is to provide new ways of understanding where problems exist so that you can then tailor programming and services to cater to those needs. So real-time information is obviously critical for us to know, how to provide services and who needs them. And currently, so many of the issues around education, nutrition, health, employment, et cetera, are that information available in more traditional ways from a census, say, comes about every 5 or 10 years. And even when it is available, it's maybe no longer relevant. It might not be truly representative. So some ways we're thinking about addressing that with AI tools include things like using satellite imagery and AI technology to map where schools are in Liberia as our first use case context. And mapping out where a school is means that we can then understand where there are gaps in education offerings, where those schools may or may not have connectivity that's so essential to make sure that they're offering quality education and that kids there have access to real information. So that's one way we're doing it. Another thing we're looking at is using a partnership with a telco in Iraq to see if there are patterns in people's mobile data. So the way they text, the way they use mobile financing, the way they place calls that correspond with more demographic realities so that we can have census-like information on where poverty is concentrated that can feed into the hands of people with the ability to use that information for good and to tailor interventions that correspond with real-time needs. And there are other projects we're looking at that are pretty controversial, so definitely thought-provoking for this audience. Anything from using image recognition systems that might be able to interpret someone's image and give feedback as to whether that person is suffering from malnutrition. Really great potential for that to feed into positive nutrition programming, but also huge concerns around data and privacy and other violations of ethical conduct. So in thinking through all of these ways that we need to do no harm, we also want to think about doing good while recognizing that these are tools and that at some point they'll fail. So asking the question of who they will fail for and how we can then redress that failure continues to be really important.
Thank you, Jennie. So I now want to invite you all to engage either with these 4 people or to offer your own comments and thoughts in this vein. we've heard a couple of very thought-provoking sessions in the morning, and now you have these 4 input statements, which were very interesting to me. So I was just wondering whether any of you has anything to add or questions.
As we wait for the first person to hold up his or her hand, if you were walking in late, the activity for the session is the yellow envelope, so maybe take it out and do that as well.
Please, if you can introduce yourself. And
My name is Jennie. I'm from Tilt in the Netherlands. Can everybody hear me? Thank you. I better not forget my question now. We've spoken a lot about categorization, and we've spoken about making the ethical norms explicit that are coded into data. And I'm wondering if, while this is an admirable goal, and I think this is the way forward, I'm wondering what is not explicit yet that is preventing that from happening. It's something that we want to do, but if it's not happening, why is it not happening, and what are the steps that we need to make in order to get there? Because there's still a lot that happens without the assumptions being made explicit. So a question about assumptions and coding that into norms.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that?
I think profit-seeking motives of, for instance, insurance companies will leave them no alternative, but not to but not to adopt those ethical constraints. But I mean, I'm not really an expert in this area. I hope, I wish there was some industry expert in that area who testify to how AI is actually used in policy underwriting, or somebody from banks who can tell us whether AI is being truly used dominantly or predominantly in loan underwriting. I think we need more kind of first-hand testimonies to start calling them out on, why are you not doing this, right? I'm not 100% sure, how many companies out there are actually doing, machine-based underwriting yet. You read about police deployment, algorithmic police deployment, but which police department has actually begun doing it? Much of this talk, I think, kind of precedes the actual deployment of AI in these areas. So if there is anyone in the audience with the information on that.
Oh, just to quickly sort of set on the record, predictive policing have dictated police locations and movements and resource allocation priorities in a number of American cities. So I think in the predictive policing case, your point is well taken, but actually in the predictive policing case, it is already a system that is being deployed.
Thanks. Rehema, I just want to add on to something that you mentioned, which is how we need more regulation in the space. And I've heard that quite a lot with all of the AI and ethics issues. And really what I want to add to that is, I'm currently working on a research project where we use industry, where I'm talking to industry experts to understand what challenges they're facing in building more ethical technology, whether that's AI or using other kinds of emerging technology products. And there seems to be a massive gap there. Even teams that really want to do good and want to build systems that's good for everybody, they are looking for guidelines. And so how do we sort of bridge this gap or have better conversations between academia and industry, because they're ready and they're really, really seeking for more knowledge. So how can we have that conversation faster? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Vidushi from Article 19. Thank you so much for your comments. It's made me really think through some of the work that I do. And I just want to share 2 thoughts I had and maybe put it out to the audience to kind of better think through. So the first was that when we talk about narratives around AI, I wonder how the dominant narrative plays out across contexts, and in this context specifically in the Global South. So to give you an example, I've been doing a literature review of how AI is perceived in India. And so I look at academic papers and op-eds and news articles and the like. And I find I think I found like 4 critical articles, but maybe 220 something articles about the potential of AI, and there's so much that can be done and it's going to solve a lot of problems. And I think this is because AI is seductive in the sense that it offers efficiency across large populations. And then when you couple that with the idea around datafication of people in the Global South, I think there's an interesting problem that arises there, which means to contextualize, for example, the Aadhaar system in India is as popular as it is because it offers people the opportunity to be identified, to say that you exist to the state and you're visible to the state. And so there's a race to be identified there. But there's also people that are systematically hidden and conveniently forgotten within larger systems. And so when you take those 2 norms in context, it becomes a bit worrying to think about fairness in AI in the Indian context. And I just wonder, is it a technical solution or is it a social problem? And I think you could argue either way, but would be interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, it's also super interesting that people feel the need to ascribe good and bad attributes, right, to technology. Sasha, I know that you had a question or a comment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was a comment about, it actually follows on what you just said, which is the difficulty of sort of, binary reading of these technologies and their deployment as good or bad. And the example that I wanted to bring to the table in thinking about Global South, it was a presentation that some people from Palantir Technology did together with people from Human Rights Watch at MIT last year. So Palantir is an intelligence firm that developed sophisticated algorithms for risk assessment in financial markets, and then they developed stuff that they, closely with the US military, that they were using in active conflict zones. So, risk systems for soldier deployment, for targeting, for nominating people to be added to the lists for the targeted assassination program via drone. So this is Palantir Technologies, a company that was involved in that type of stuff. And they came to MIT and did a presentation with people from Human Rights Watch and someone who was also involved with UN stuff. And they're talking about a new partnership they were developing around refugee assessment and logistics management and distribution of aid. And right, so my question, I asked them there, I was like, so wait, you're partnering with this company that's active in active military zones to literally nominate people to be murdered, and do you think that you can trust them when they say they're not going to use any of the data that you're gathering in refugee camps, many of which are filled with displaced people from US-backed wars of empire and petroleum domination? And you think that they're just telling you, oh, we signed an agreement with you that we won't share this refugee camp data with US intelligence, and you believe that? So the question is, to complicate the good-bad binary, it's like you might do partnerships with firms that are selling AI services to do, UNICEF might sign a contract with somebody like Palantir, but I just think we have to be really, really careful to only look at at the project level, and we have to keep bringing back in sort of like history and the larger geopolitical scale. And when we analyze like how are these systems being deployed, how are they being connected with each other, is the data being shared on the back end, and to what end? Because something that might be good in the short term in project deployment in the refugee camp might also be training an algorithm that's, that's illegally nominating people for state-backed murder.
Thank you very much. Last month on 5th, Alex again, last month there is a company called Mattel that pulled off a product it was meant to launch next year out of privacy concerns. It's Aristotle, for those of you that read it, the article was in the New York Times. In the previous session, somebody was saying this AI just keeps getting data, so we keep giving it more. It looks like this product, what it did, they decided to start getting a kid since when the kid was born and get everything the kid knows and learn along so that it has all the data now the child is learning to improve on the AI. And then you can actually see the implications if it's your child and there's a camera following, recording everything the kid does and what the implications would be. So is that the right way we want to make sure that since we want to be included everywhere, that we ask for cameras and everything we do is recorded so that it can be included in the AI? Leading me on to the second question, which is I want to get the professor's legal consideration. Would it help if we obligated all AI to have some sort of or something analogous to a panic button, such that there are certain no-go areas that the AI shall never go into? For example, it has to have an override. When on their issues that are non-disputatious, for example, child protection, save lives, uphold human rights, gender parity, certain things. What would be the consequences if we obligated or required by law that there are certain panic buttons that no algorithm will go into those areas as a way of trying to include equality, not just in the global south, but worldwide? Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Danith has a comment or a question.
Thank you. So my question is about how can we empower talented engineers from the global south to develop AI applications that actually amplify cultural specific values instead of just being kind of sucked into really big companies that develop platforms and just kind of adjust them to specific countries? How can we really cultivate a good culture of engineers in the global south that could create a robust AI environment that could really benefit the country that they come from?
It speaks to some of the things that Kathleen was saying. Rehema, you wanted to respond?
How can we empower good engineers in the South to develop context-fitting AI applications? I think it's to do with training them from the South itself, but also supporting them to carry out research within that context and to develop those applications from the same context.
Adding to that, I'm just going to say again funding, because I meet a lot of people who are brilliant and they have brilliant ideas, but at the end of the day, they have to keep the lights on. So are you going to build a brilliant idea that could rip off big in like 5 years, or are you going to pay your bills? So I think funding. Also, I'd like to add to a comment that was made earlier about how to the narratives around AI in India. That's actually interesting that you say that, because it's something I thought is similar to Kenya, because up until 3 or 4 months ago, conversations around AI along with ethics and regulation and inclusion are not something that I come across often. And I think I attend quite a few AI and just data science meetups around Nairobi. So it's interesting to see that we're still sort of in the excitement phase where we see all the possibilities that could come with it, and we aren't at the point where we're seeing the dark side of things. And I don't know if we have to wait for something horrible to happen before that happens, but I wish we could introduce the two together so that as people are getting excited about AI, they're also just cognizant of all the things, the dark side of all that it could come with.
I think training engineers is not as easy as training engineers in other areas, because it does require society-wide discussion of what is ethical. I mean, yes, algorithm results in some unintended consequences, some unintended results that shock people's ethical thinking. But much of those results are unintended. Sometimes the strictly merit-based or strictly number-based algorithm can result in shocking results. What do you do when you run algorithm and you get something bad? Is that bad, or are we wrong, right? There has to be some society. I mean, I'm not being explicit about which, but some of you probably know what I'm talking about. And there has to be society-wide discussion about what is ethical. Only then we can train engineers about what to do. And it will not be at the engineers level. I think it has to be at the executive level on how much these how much of this society-wide discussion can be looped back into building of AI. And since I have the mic to address some other comments, Sasha's and I forgot your name, about keeping some designating some no-go areas for AI. It's I don't particularly agree with it. That's why I'm not speaking that passionately about it. But it's happening already. In Korea, we just adopted database merging guideline. So the government assigned like 6-7 agencies, and there you can ask the agencies to merge two different databases built for different purposes. For instance, refugee camp data, right? If you want to merge that with other law enforcement data, you can bring the data over to that agency, and the agency provides the merging service. And who do you think was the first set of customers were? Insurance companies, right? They came and they asked other companies that have data come to the agencies, and they received merged data. Now, this is a violation of data protection law, because those databases were built for different purposes. Now they are being merged. And Korea has one of the strongest data protection law in the whole world. So there's a big controversy. But if there's a big controversy, and the civil society is demanding that the government health data, now in this case, it was the merging of government health data with insurance data. The civil society is demanding that the government health data should never be merged for any profit purpose, or merged with any data collected by private companies. I don't agree with that. A lot of times private companies do valuable service. A lot of times private companies enhance, advance science and technology for the greater good of the society. should not just ban private, should not ban private merging of databases, or should not ban outright merging of government data with privately crowdsourced data. But I think the public's demand, public's claim to some ownership on big data will continue, and will continue to increase through this window of data protection law. I talked to people in Europe who have instituted GDPR. They don't seem to have a clear answer to how they're going to get around data protection regulation in merging different databases. Well, if we keep avoiding that issue, we cannot have that kind of control that you are talking about. We should confront that issue and discuss openly and discuss frankly that mechanistic application of data protection law will just outlaw big data, period. So we have to cut a compromise, and through that compromise we can talk about outer boundary of AI or some no-go areas.
Thank you. I was hoping that the data protection angle would get fleshed out in the manner it had. I know that Nagla has been waiting to comment for a while.
If I may, I just want to go back to the point of engineers. You're absolutely right, but it is not enough. I think the problem is more of the ecosystem. So that's precisely why being here in this community and approaching the matter from a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinarity perspective is important. Because at the end of the day, there are engineers and there is funding. Not enough, so definitely there is need for more, but they're not doing what they would like to do because the culture, the understanding, the need for people like somebody like me, who's an economist, to work on policy impact, to make, and many others in the room, to work on making, to deliver the message of the importance of this type of technology for the good, for inclusion, etc. Because what happens is that we end up having a scenario of brain drain, and those very bright minds end up, working in the developed world, and we lose the potential altogether. Thank you.
Thank you,
Nnenna. Hi. I think AI will create more challenges in democratic countries. Lots of data are in the hand of the governments, and they can use in the way that they want. I'm from Iran, and for example, there is cameras for control the traffic rules. It's very good. And in recent years, they can control the speed. But recently, they use to identify the women who are not covered their hair in the cars, and so they identify the car number and they could arrest the women. So how we can force non-democratic countries to abide ethic rules, regarding AI, and I'm definitely think it will go. Put lots of pressure, more pressure in the citizens in the country when it's come to how accurate the data is and how they could use the data which are their hand. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more comments and then
I'm
do
Ferdi from Iran.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 more comments and then do a quick wrap up by everyone on the panel.
Here? Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Julio. I work in Chile. And I've got a lot going on in my head. I need some AI to process it a little faster. But 2 things. One is, since I began today, or the readings prior to this experience, I've had it in my head that we're talking about artificial intelligence and inclusion. And for some reason, it always felt like inclusion was secondary to artificial intelligence. And we're talking within, right, artificial intelligence. But I feel that perhaps if we flipped it a little, or at least if I flipped it a little and think, how can artificial intelligence really help inclusion? And when I think of inclusion, I think of much bigger structures, much bigger conversations, I think that we touched upon earlier today, which is how do you listen to people in communities? How do you do basic direct action organizing of the 60s, the 70s, that today is called human-centered design, et cetera, to continue to learn and use this discourse that we're having around artificial intelligence, but really to keep pushing, changing the ways in which governments and people have conversations about creating solutions for the people who are affected by the problem. That's one thing going on in my head. The other thing going on in my head, in reflecting especially in relationship to sort of the everyday people that relate to the work that many of us do, is that in Chile, we have a project that is a platform, online platform, to address the needs of LGBT kids or kids who are affected by discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, who are trying to kill themselves. Yeah, so a few years ago, I created an organization, and that organization needed help helping other kids, because the government of Chile doesn't have the infrastructure to actually respond to their needs, even though Chile has the worst levels of teenage suicide, or among the worst in Latin America. So we created this simple online platform with a partner, and instead of responding to 150 cases in a year, we're now responding to 1,500 cases every semester of these kids who need help in some way from counselors. And now we're talking to other countries in the region to try to help with this platform. And we asked ourselves the question of artificial intelligence. So how can this help us really respond to these needs, because the demand is very high? But in the end, or not in the end, in the process that we're in right now, I think there were two comments that were made earlier that have been most interesting to our work, which is affect and empathy. Right, so we talk about the machine of all of this. Sorry, I don't have all the language. I'm coming from the inclusion side, I guess. The machine of all of this. But I think in the end for us, in some issues that are related to inclusion, you really do in the end have to have the human on the other side. Perhaps artificial intelligence can help diminish, of the 1,500 cases, we can get to 150 that need the most help and therefore need a therapist. But I think one of the questions, in relationship to inclusion, especially in this region where in Chile the infrastructure of the Ministry of Health cannot respond to the need of these kids, is do we need to go this far? Or is there a simpler solution to get to including these kids?
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite another very short comment, and in the meantime, I'm sorry I've borrowed this one from Urs because I love it so much. I'm going to invite the panel to do their wrap-up in tweet-sized remarks. So you have time to think while we get the last comment.
Yeah. So
the old one.
I have a not fully formed question, but it has to do with the use of AI in education. And I feel like precisely asks where your question left off. The use of AI in education was one of the big most things that people were most excited about in good uses. It makes me nervous. I'd be curious to hear the panelists' thoughts about what would work and what wouldn't.
Okay, we're going to start. Just to give you a little more time, I'll begin with my tweet-sized remark, which is, I agree with Nagla.
The lady there, I don't know which country you're from, but on the policing, the use of AI for policing, I think the better control is at the input phase again. And if you have data protection law, usually data protection law should have some regulation on CCTV that's used on public areas, and there can be some limit on the number and purpose of CCTVs. And to your comment, yes, in Korea, we just changed our president through massive demonstrations in the metropolitan area, and the police kept downsizing the number, the size of the crowd to de-emphasize, how much public support there is. And it was technology, not particularly AI, but it was a technology that was used to calculate more precisely the size of the crowd to help with people is organizing. And there are tons of other cases where technology was used in mobilizing the public. So yes, we didn't get to talk about those big good uses of AI, but I'm sure there will be other panels.
That was quite the tweet, I must say.
Very briefly then, to respond to the initial question about, well, if this is possible to, translate ethics into code that runs these powerful AI systems, why aren't we doing it? Well, I think it's important to remember that it's not going to be super easy or cheap in many cases, and focusing on how to build out incentives to do this work is going to be really critical.
My last remark is going to be related to your comment or question about can AI support the Global South deliver better quality education? Yes, it can in so many aspects, because we have a challenge of big student teacher-lecturer ratio. We also have the quality, so AI can support in these many, can support the education system in these aspects. And also the aspect he talked about of, I think it was about student support services outside the classroom, being able to follow up what's going on with the student. But the big question is, if we do not address the challenges of AI and inclusion, then we'll not be able to get useful applications of AI in education, in health, in agriculture, and so many other sectors.
So mine is going to be a bit of a Twitter thread. Just to respond to the governments using AI to police. I'm normally wondering if a bottom-up approach wouldn't be better, because sometimes governments have incentive to not have data protection laws. And for my context anyway, I find that people who do not work in technology are not very aware of how technology affects their everyday. So you think that because you're in health or in education, AI is not affecting you, but at the end of the day, all our data is being churned into these big AI machines, let's call them. So just getting people cognizant of the fact that everything that is collected about you could, at the end of the day, be used against you, might push people to push the government to then implement data protection laws. And then finally, the end of my Twitter thread, I think that we need to make sure that we as individuals from the Global South are not just recipients of advances in AI, but shapers and champions as well. Thank you.
Thank you all for an excellent session, and for also showing Switzerland that the Global South will do what the Global South will do. Thank you.